Hello students, I'm Professor Benavides and let's go over the first part of chapter 3, introducing lists. Let's go ahead and do this by looking at the code. So what is a list? A list is a collection of items in a particular order. Now, the items in the list do not have to be in any relation to each other, but they usually are. List names should be plural. That's really important. So the name that you give for your list should be plural. To create a list, you give it a name and you put the elements in square brackets. So the individual elements are separated by commas. So when you print a list, Python returns its representation of the list, including the square brackets. So here you see on line 9, we'll make this a little bit bigger for you. On line 9, you see I have a list called bicycles. So bicycles gets, and then I have the square bracket that identifies this as a list. The elements of the list include Trek, Cannondale, Redline, and Specialized. So this is a list. The data that's in here is are strings, and I'm using single quotes, but you could use double quotes. To print it or to run the program, I'm going to hold down Control and then B, and you see down below that I've got the list printed out to the console window, and it's got square brackets thrown in there. Let me just go do another example of this. So let's say, for example, I want to have, let's go ahead and just say numbers. Gets. And we're going to do this as strings, not as numbers, but you could do numerics on here, so I'll just say 1, 2, and this could have been double quotes, but a lot of Python people just use the single quotes. 1, 2, 3, and then 4. Okay. So to print that list, I would just simply say print. Open parenthesis and pass the name of the list. All right. So if I go ahead and run this, you'll see how I have my bicycles at the top, and then followed by my list of numbers. So this is rock bottom understanding what a list is. The syntax for a list is you give it a name, the name is going to be plural, and the elements are going to be inside square brackets, and you can have elements of any data type, so it could be a list of numbers, in which case you wouldn't have double quotes or quotes around them, Boolean. But for right now, we're just using strings just to go ahead and understand the simple syntax for creating a list. Let's go ahead and look at the next example here. In this next example, we're going to learn how to access the elements in the list. So here we see that lists are ordered collections. You can access any element in the list by using the position or index of the desired items. So when accessing a single item from a list, just that element is returned without the square bracket. So what we're doing here is we're contrasting what we did before, versus what we did, what we're going to do now. Okay, so you can also use string methods on any element on the list. So for right now, we're just going to go ahead and run this, and we see very different from before. I get Trek and Trek. Of course, the second one is because I applied the title method. So let's just take a look at what's happening here. On line 9, I go ahead and declare and initialize my list. So I put these 4 elements in the list. And the important thing to remember here is the concept of zero-based counting. This is the most important thing that we have to learn right now. What is an index? So the first element is at index 0. The second element is at index 1. The third index, is, or the third element is at index 2, right? And the fourth element is at index 3. So right now I'm only accessing the first one. If I wanted to access the other ones, I could go ahead and let's just go ahead and copy this, live life dangerously, and put that down here. And let's just do that again. I can go ahead and copy this line of code and then just do a Control V. And get rid of the first one so I can be consistent. And let's just do 4 of them, right? So we have 0, 1, 2, and 3. Okay, so I'm gonna do a Control B, and there we have it, right? What happens if I make a mistake and I think that that last one is at index 4? What would happen then? You know, if I did something, you know, like this, ask for that by mistake. Let's go ahead and see that. I get an index error, list index out of range. We study about that later on in the chapter, but I thought I'd introduce that a little bit early because it is fairly important concept. So for right now, in this particular demo, we have to learn how to access the elements in a list. And to access the elements in a list, we have to learn about zero-based counting, you know, and use the index value. Remember, the first element is at index 0. Okay, let's go on to our next example here. Continuing our study of the index position starts at 0, not 1. Okay, so if I did say bicycles of 1, I'm going to end up getting, let me go ahead and run this. I'm going to get a canonical. So what happens is that sometimes people end up with these off by 1 errors, or they, you know, they say, why am I getting canonical? I thought I was going to get trek. You know, that's the first element on there, right? So if you wanted the first one, you've got to use index 0. So zero-based counting, very important idea here with lists. So the following code asks for bicycles at index 1 and index 3. So down below we see the output is Cannondale and then specialized. Cannondale is at index, Cannondale is at index 1, and specialized is at index 3. Okay, so if you get that wrong, you end up with off by 1 errors. Next example on here. So Python has a very special syntax for accessing the last element. This is fairly unique, yes. By asking for the item at index of -1, Python always returns the last item on the list. So if you'll see here, let me go ahead and run this so we can see what this looks like. If I say bicycles -1 and print that, it's going to give me specialized. And it continues. So if I say bicycles -2, it'll give me red line. It's just another way. It's a fast way to getting. Usually it's a fast way to get to the last item, you know, in the list. You know, the last element in the list. It's a fast way. I know a lot of people say, well, why would you just use, you know, index? Let's see, this is 0, 1, 2, 3. Use index 3. Like you get the same thing. You get specialized, right? This is just a real fast way of getting. Okay, so when you do -1 to repeat, this returns the second item from the end of the list. Next one on here, let's go ahead and run it real fast. So we can use individual values from a list. So what's the point? The point is that you can use individual values from a list just as you would any other variable. So to make a comparison on here, I created a variable. I created a variable on line 5 and I called it redline. That variable, I called it second bike. So bicycles is the list on line 6 and it has my bicycles, it's plural. So my first message here, I simply say, My first bicycle was A, and I'm accessing bicycles of 0, and I'm applying the title method. So the sentence comes out, my first bicycle was a Trek. But I made another message, and I say my second bicycle was a, and in this case, I use a variable. So to compare chapter 2 with chapter 3 is that we can use, lists just like variables here, when we're constructing a formatted string. Remember, a formatted string is when we use the little letter F or the big letter F, and then we follow it by a double quotes or single quotes to create a string literal. And when we create a formatting string, remember, we could put variables or a list element, access a list element, by putting them inside of these curly brackets. Remember, these curly brackets are the placeholders. So this string says my second bicycle was a, and I've got these curly brackets. That's the little placeholder. I put in my variable name. I didn't need to put in that title thing, and I just threw that in there. If it makes it easier to understand, you can go ahead and just access the variable. Let's run that. And we see how it says my second bicycle was a red line. It's not, the first character is not capitalized because I got rid of the title method. Same thing for the one above it. If I want to simplify this so that you can just get the main idea here, okay? You put the variable or the list in the curly brackets, and it will access that element, or it will access the variable. So here what I'm doing is I'm just contrasting variable with list. Notice how on lines 11 and 12 is where I print the messages to the screen. So let's go to the try it 3.1. And this particular try it, let's take a quick look at this. It says, hey, store the names of a few of your friends in a list. I do that on line 6 here. And yeah, I embellish this a little bit because a lot of these things from the book, they're learning experiences. So you want to do them your way, right? So it says here, print each person's name by accessing the element in the list one at a time. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to contrast printing out the whole list on line 6 and 7, right? Versus what this particular assignment asks for. This particular assignment is asking for printing each element one at a time. That's done here from lines 10 through 12. Now I throw in the print statement there. It's just a way of getting a blank line. If I wanted to, I could just go, instead of using a print statement, I could just go ahead and do a /n right in here inside of the, if you put in a /n in the opening of your string, that will give you a new line. So this is just a primitive way of getting a blank line. Let me go ahead and run this so you can see what's going on. So on line 6, I declare my list of friends. My name, I could have called it friends, but I called it names, just as long as it's plural. Then I print the list. What does that give me? That gives me my list in a square brackets. That's what you get when you print the entire list. But what if you want each particular element printed one at a time? Then you would have to access the index value. So here I'm going names of 0, names of 1, names of 2. If that will print them on separate lines, because the print statement or the print function at the end of it, it includes a carriage return line feed. So it prints the name and then it goes down a line and then the next name is printed. The carriage return is given and it goes down to the next line and the next name is printed. Okay? So if I want them to go left to right, I know this wasn't asked for in this, but I went ahead and threw this in. You can go ahead, you can do many things, but one thing you could do is use a formatting string and use the index values inside of placeholders. Okay, so here I have my formatted string. I'm using single quotes, but I could have used double quotes. And I'm accessing names of 0, names of 1, names of 2. And I'm applying the title method. And so I get Devin, Jerry, and Jaime being printed below. So I like the little print statement. I mean, I know a lot of people find it pretty primitive, but like, for example, right here, if I add it here and run it, it gives me like that nice little separator at the very end where it says finished in 0.1 seconds. Got like a blank line. It kind of like makes it look, for me, it kind of makes it look nice. You know, like I said, if you didn't want to have a print statement, I know we've covered this in the previous chapters, but it's always good to review. We do a \n here and then run it again and see how here, this is an important, I think, learning experience here. Is if something's not working or if you want to temporarily not run something, just make a comment like I did on line 14 to try out this other way of getting a new line, right? So if I don't have that on there and run it, see how they're stuck together now. So I think it really does look nicer. I'm a firm believer in white space. I love white space. If I don't have white space, I just don't understand things, you know? So I'm trying to impress upon you that. So to review here, what did we do? We went ahead and created a list of names and we printed them out one element at a time. That was the main idea, lines 10, 11, and 12, and I threw in a couple of ideas along the way. The next try it exercise is 3.2, and it's called greetings. The idea here is to print a personalized message to each of your friends. So let me go ahead and just run this. And so basically what I'm doing here, let's just go top to bottom. On line 4, I create my list of friends. I just called it names. Then I create a formatted string and I assign it to message, and then I print. Now notice how I could have created a different variable for each one of these, but since I print it as soon as I create it, I can go ahead and reuse it and access the next one. Otherwise, if I did my print statement separate, I would have to have, this would have to be like message 1, message 2, message 3, because then they would keep overriding. But here, I access the first element and print it. So it says, it would say, let me go ahead in the beginning, it would say, hello, Devin, exclamation point. Now, a lot of times beginners do this exclamation point, they want to put it inside the placeholder, inside the curly brackets, and it won't work there. It's got to be outside of the curly brackets. It's a good reason why this exercise has that, is to make sure you know where to put it. Inside the curly brackets, you're going to put the list or the variable. That's it. Well, there may be some formatting that you can go ahead and do. We'll learn how to do that later. But it would apply only to that variable or list item. So we do the same thing to the second item and the third item. And then all I'm doing here on the latter part here is I'm just contrasting that with concatenation, which is the older way. In the previous edition of his book, he used to use this style. And that's when you use the plus sign, that's called concatenation. Now in the new book, he uses a formatted string. And formatted strings are I think it's the way to go, definitely. The reason why I contrast concatenation is that you may encounter that in older code, and it's going to probably take years to get it out of the system, right? So you got to know what that means and how to go ahead and edit code that has concatenation rather than formatting strings. Remember what formatted strings came out in like Python 3.6, you know. But in the previous edition of the book, which has the same cover, so it's kind of hard to tell whether you're in the first or second edition, you can see slightly different ways of doing things that are probably still important to know right now. So what I'm doing here is I'm using an F string, and I'm using the print statement to go ahead and print it versus See, the method done above here is I go ahead and create a string variable called message, and then I print the variable. Down here at the bottom, I'm not creating a variable. I'm simply printing a string literal, right? So this F string, as you can see here, I'm enclosing it in double quotes or single quotes. It's up to you, doesn't matter. A string can be either way, okay? So that's exercise, try it, exercise 3.2. Let's go ahead and take a look at 3.3, and I'll run it real fast. And let's take a quick look here. So it says, make a list of cars you would like to have and print print statements. So line 4, I create my list. So how do I create a list? Remember, I remember the names of the list need to be plural. It seems like all of my demonstrations so far have been strings, but it could be other data types, and it could be a list of doubles, a list of integers, a list of Boolean data types, okay? So for right now, we're just using strings because it's probably the easiest thing to understand, and we want to understand zero-based counting as the primary, one of the main ideas that we're learning right here with lists. So on line 4, I declare my list, and then I simply print it the old-fashioned way, right? Or I print it so that it shows the entire list with the brackets. We know that. Then, blast from the past, I'm still showing you the concatenation on line 8. Concatenation is done with the plus sign. And you concatenate, which simply means you're joining together strings. Yes, I do believe the formatted string is much better. At first, it takes a little bit of time to get used to it. A lot of people want to put the F inside the double quotes, and that's not going to work out. It's got to be outside the double quotes or outside of your string. Then you put in your string, and you use the curly brackets for placeholders for variables or to access the elements in your list. So here, you can see I'm accessing, on line 11, I'm accessing the last element of the list. And on line 8, I'm accessing the first element on the list. So when you run this, at the top, you see the list, and then below it, you see how I'm accessing the first and the last element on the list. So remember, Honda's is 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. Of course, this last one on here, if I would just say 4, okay, we get the same thing, right? So it just depends on how you think. Do you want to use the 4, or do you want to use -1? It's pretty much up to you, okay? So that's the first part of your chapter on lists. I'm going to go ahead and break up this chapter because it's kind of long, and I want to bring out one important thing before I go here, is that the author of your book has something called cheat sheets. So if you go to his website, you find these cheat sheets, and they're PDF files. And let me just show you one real fast. Here's his cheat sheet for lists. Now, he's got 2 whole chapters on lists. So what he does is he doesn't break these up by chapter. He puts in everything from all of chapter 3 and all of chapter 4 on here. So what have we covered so far? We covered what are lists. We said that a list stores a series of items in a particular order. We learned how to define a list, which is the name. We use a name, and that should be plural, and we put the elements in square brackets. To access the elements in the list, we use the index value, and we use zero-based counting. So the index of the first element is 0. The index of the second element is 1. And that's all we've covered so far in this. The next section of chapter 3 will go on to talk about modifying individual items, adding elements, removing elements, etc. And I believe chapter 4 starts with the concept of looping. So how do I propose you use these? This is a great way to get your head screwed on as to what the topic is about. And after you finish reading chapters 3 and 4, you can come back here, and this can be a way of putting everything in your head, you know, in a great way of getting ready, you know, for the exam. It has just the code, so you could very easily just select some of this code and put it into, you know, put it into your text editor and run it so that you can learn it. That's the best way to learn this stuff is to emulate good style. And the author of your book has a good, simple style for us to emulate. He's got some good, simple ideas, you know, like the variables, we're going to use lowercase on here. I mean, is it a syntax violation if you use uppercase? No, but we use uppercase to mean something else. So if it's a variable, you want to use lowercase, and if, you know, so there's a lot of things that the book does right, and one of them is these cheat sheets as a great way to get your head screwed on the topic you're going to cover at the beginning, and then I highly recommend that you use it again after you finish reading the chapters. Okay, my friends, that's it for this part of chapter 3. We'll go on to the next